In 1279, Charles I of Anjou, the now King of Sicily, had relocated the capital to Naples. He decided to build a grand castle to solidify his power, a fortress like no other, overlooking the sea. Castel Nuovo. Now, like many medieval buildings that have evolved over the centuries, the case is the same for Castel Nuovo, and very little of its 13th century structure remains. It has endured many changes of hands and many invasions over its long life, and many a conspiracy. Now, given that Italy has been invaded more times than the Millwall pitch, this is not surprising. But I'm no expert on architecture, so I will concentrate on the history of the castle rather than speculate. This also isn't a travel bit, so here we go. Let's get stuck in. Charles of Anjou was the son of King Louis of France and Blanche of Castile, the youngest son. Initially destined for the church, Charles abandoned this for the life of a soldier, even fighting in the 7th and 8th Crusades. But his claim to fame was his conquest of the Kingdom of Sicily, and Naples, taking mind that Italy had yet to be unified as we know it today. Frederick, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, had a bastard son, Manfred. Manfred had controversially usurped the Kingdom of Sicily in 1258, falsely claiming that the 4-year-old King Conradin had died, when he was very much alive. Oh, and it may have been my imagination, but the water from this fountain was easily the most refreshing I've tasted anywhere else. I kept coming back for more. Bloody lovely, in fact. Manfred and Conradin, they were both part of the same dynasty, the Hohenstaufen. The Pope calls Charles of Anjou to deal with the usurper, and in 1266, at the Battle of Benevento, Manfred was hunted down and slain, a blow to the Holy Roman Empire. The Pope also didn't want a child as king. Besides, said child, Conradin, was proven to be a pest by now, and had since been excommunicated. Instead, the Pope installs Charles of Anjou as the new King of Sicily. This proved controversial, but there was little anyone could do about it. Charles and his brother, King Philip the Bold of France, carve up much of Italy in various conquests. Following the Battle of Tagliacozzo, Charles has the 15-year-old, by now, Conradin beheaded, thus ending the Hohenstaufen dynasty. He transfers the capital to Naples and realises he's going to need a much bigger fortress as his base of operations. Castle Nuovo, a bastion looking out over the sea. And in 1279, construction began and would take 4 years to build. Apparently though, King Charles never actually lived here, because as it was nearing completion, chaos erupted in the form of the War of the Sicilian Vespers. Simply put, the Italians didn't want the French ruling anymore and rebelled. They had decided to ask Peter of Aragon to take the throne instead, taking first Sicily, then Naples. Charles was out. But even Peter didn't get a chance to sit his derriere in the castle, as he died just a couple of years later in 1285. And coincidentally, in the same year so did Charles. effectively bookending the year with their deaths. So, who should take the throne of Naples? Charles's son, creatively named Charles, though he is known historically as Charles the Lame. As for myself, it turns out you cannot see all of the castle without a guide, so I did just that, and learned of several gruesome tales that we will get into later. But Peter's line would end up keeping Sicily. Charles would keep the mainland of Naples. So the Aragonese and the Angevins sort of split the two kingdoms a bit. You are probably wondering what all these ruins are and all these skeletons. Naples, as we know, is a very old city, and there is much Roman archaeology to be found. Here are ruins dating back about the 1st century BC to the fall of the empire, with many a skeleton buried here, though so little is known, and I'm not about to venture into idle speculation. Now, Charles II, the Lame, was King of Naples, though to complicate things, he is currently imprisoned for being a complete bellend by attacking the Aragonese, Peter's lot. He was told not to. People had to step in to get the new king released, including Edward Longshanks of England, fresh from beating up the Welsh. It is Edward who deals with the new Pope, to eventually free him. No, not the Pope, Charles. And Charles the Lame was eventually released several years later, and finally crowned in 1289. He would be the first king to actually live in this literally named new castle. Edward Longshanks was highly influential during these times, before and after the king's release, though by 1290 he withdrew this influence because he had affairs elsewhere, beating up the Scots. The Angevins and the Aragonese would squabble for years to come, but there was a horrible outbreak of peace in 1295. And in 1309, his son, Robert the Wise, inherited the throne. Here the castle goes through many renovations. The previous king, Charles the Lame, had done so also, but not to this scale. He makes many changes, positive changes, to the kingdom, and embraced the emerging culture of the Renaissance, which at this point was more or less limited to Florence. But alas, his son and heir died around 29 years of age, so the crown passed to said son's daughter, Joanna I of Naples. But the reign of this young queen would be plagued with conspiracy and murder. Enter the Pepini brothers, utter degenerates who had been imprisoned by Robert the Wise for crimes such as rape, pillage and treason. Joanna's husband was Anjou, Duke of Calabria, brother of Louis the Great of Hungary, and he wants the Pepini brothers released, a highly controversial decision. When Joanna becomes queen, Andrew tries to use his leverage while awaiting the coronation. This doesn't bode well for the court. One night, Andrew and Joanna were out hunting and stayed the night in a lodge. A servant quickly bolts the door, while several conspirators jumped the Duke from the shadows, strangling him to death with a cord, while the new queen could only watch. A reckless thing to do, because Louis the Great, the King of Hungary, sets out to get his revenge, forcing the new queen to flee for France and for safety. Despite the Pope clearing her name, Louis ransacked the abandoned castle in revenge, before settling there, enacting brutality on anyone who he suspected of being involved in the murder. Yeah, the good old dick twist. Yet even he was forced to flee Naples when a terrible plague struck the city, the Black Death. The Hungarian king did fall ill, but miraculously survived. His wife, however, fell to this apocalyptic curse. Plague or not, Joanna would have her castle, and with it her kingdom. She was welcomed with open arms, mainly because of the barbaric treatment by the Hungarian snake. His brief but terrible rule would stain the image of Hungarians for centuries. The Hungarian king still wants Joanna out as queen, and begs the Pope to remove her. When he gets told no, he invades Italy again, though this time Joanna is going nowhere. He was rabid with rage, and led every assault himself, scaling walls, shrugging off assailants, determined to take the kingdom. Yet when he gets too close, Castel Nuovo within his reach, Joanna tactically retreats, denying him this revenge even then. Seriously wounded following a crossbow to the leg, the barbarian king is forced to abandon his conquest and limp back to Hungary. Joanna was known as Queen Giovanna and was said to be beautiful, with many lovers visiting her bedchambers over the years. Some tales say she slung many of those lovers down a pit with no way out and a crocodile waiting at the bottom. And there is certainly a pit, and prisoners were certainly slung down there, but as for the croc, most likely a myth. Though, despite all this, Joanna's line would end there, her long reign lasting just short of 40 years, although none of her children would survive to become kings or queens. Joanna was only in her mid-50s when she died. The crown changes lines, ending in the hands of the Hungarians briefly, before ending up back in the hands of Aragon in the mid-15th century after another Joanna, II, was also without heir. Alfonso V had assaulted the castle and made his court there. It was Alfonso who pretty much rebuilt the castle to what we see today. The triumphal arch you see before you is a celebration of his entry to Naples. And then we arrive at Ferrante, his son. He's the chap who commissioned this magnificent bronze door. He was obsessed with conspiracies and the Knights Templar and knowledge, and hid many secrets into the works he commissioned, reminding those in the know of said knowledge. Constantly at war with Angevins, Ottomans, even the Papal States. Much of his politics and victories are depicted in that bronze door. A king who had to seriously prove his worth during the mid to late 15th century. But it wouldn't be open battle that threatened to undermine him. It would be conspirators, whispers in the shadows, manipulations behind the scenes, as many of his barons threatened lawsuits over centralisation of state. Not good times. He was a paranoid king, though just because you suffer from paranoia doesn't mean people are not out to get you. In this case, they most certainly were. Several barons conspire against him, so he prepares a trap. Under the pretense of a royal wedding, he lures the unruly barons into Castel Nuovo, to this very hall. There, people spring out, capturing all of them, slaying some of them, taking them to the dungeons, torture. You get the drift. A mix of Game of Thrones and Goodfellas. These bodies that you see here are most likely the remains of said barons. It wasn't wise to cross Ferrante. But with his passing, eventually, Castel Nuovo was sacked by Charles VIII of France, and Naples is annexed by Spain. Even Charles V, the famous Habsburg chap, lived here for a while. and we drift through the Renaissance and into paths seldom trod by the channel. Thank you for watching.